The briefing of the Colurian High Council had been succinct. A new inhabited world had been discovered in a previously unexplored arm of the galaxy. A long-forgotten scout probe had followed an unexplained EM signal and found a nickel-iron world in the habitation zone of a moderately sized yellow-white star. The newly scanned world showed a planet with atmosphere conducive to carbon-based life, with easily accessible resources and a mass that would be a perfect outpost and colony world for the Colurian people. A follow-up manned probe had found that the EM signal was due to the activity of the world's indigenous people. Humans, they call themselves, as surreptitious observation had revealed. The human population of the world was in excess of 8 billion, an absolutely astonishingly high population when considering the physical size of the world. It was clear that the humans were reproducing at an alarmingly high and unsustainable rate, far in excess of what any intelligent planet-bound society could tolerate. This was the primary argument that the Colonization Committee had used to get the humans declared a Class 4 species. Though the Colurian hegemony was composed of many different species from many different worlds, position in Colurian society was completely determined and controlled by your species class. Colurian species class ranged from 1 to 6. A Class 6 species was lower life with little to no sapience, what many humans might consider animals. A Class 6 species was considered to be of no interest and little more than a nuisance or a source of protein. A Class 5 species was any sapient species that had not yet reached industrialization. Class 5 species were generally used for general labor and menial tasks, workers, servants, medical experiments, etc. A Class 4 species was any life form that had progressed to general use of machines and labor-saving devices. Class 4 species generally had not conquered space travel and more advanced technologies. Class 4 species were also used for labor, but were generally placed in more advanced positions of responsibility, but were absolutely considered to be unworthy of inclusion in general Colurian society. Species of classes 1 through 3 were the only species considered worthy of inclusion in Colurian society. Class 1 was the ruling class. You must be a Class 1 species to ever have any possibility of being included in any Colurian policy making or political decisions. Classes 2 and 3 were members of general Colurian society. Everything from labourers, technical, medical, and scientific positions were reserved for classes 2 and 3. Species of classes 4 through 6 had no rights under Colurian law and were seen only as property. Several Colurian Council members had argued that the newly discovered humans were clearly at least a Class 3 species, and thusly must be protected as future members of the Colurian hegemony. But they had been overruled by other council members, who argued that any reasonably intelligent species would never behave in such a self-destructive fashion. The proponents of Class 4 classification had pointed out that rudimentary space travel and even higher level technology did not automatically classify a species as Class 3. It was clear that the humans' propensity for war and self-destruction clearly demonstrated that humanity was not ready for inclusion in Colurian society. At the end of the High Council meeting, it was decided that humans were a Class 4 species, and as such, were clearly the property of the newly expanded Colurian hegemony. Seeing that inhabitable worlds were few and far between, it was soon determined that the planet known as Earth would be officially claimed as a colony world for the Colurian people. An annexation mission was quickly planned. A fleet of Colurian processing ships were dispatched to the human planet. The mission was simple. The human population would be reduced to a more sustainable and controllable level. An initial Colurian outpost would be established, and the remaining human animals would be retrained to serve the Colurian people when they arrived. The projected population reduction was based on several factors, primarily planet and resource size, as well as making the number of humans more reasonable by management of the Colurian overseers. All of this was determined completely unemotionally and scientifically using formulas determined eons ago by the first Colurian hegemony. The final numbers determined by the Colurian computers were just over 100 million. This would necessitate the extermination of just under 8 billion humans. General Tshirt was selected as the leader of the processing fleet. General Tshirt was a member of the Djul people, a Class 1 society integrated into the Colurian hegemony nearly 3 millennia earlier. This was his third annexation mission. General Tshirt sat in his quarters reviewing the mission briefing. The humans had been classified as Class 4. The mission required him to exterminate the majority of the humans, grossly overpopulating the planet known as Earth. Then he was instructed to establish a Colurian outpost and processing facility to prepare the planet for colonization. The remaining humans would be retrained in the processing facility to prepare them as labours for the soon-to-be-arriving Colurian colonists. As he reviewed his orders, he noted that the numbers of the humans populating the planet was unbelievably high. Never in his life he had witnessed a planet so incredibly overpopulated. On his last annexation mission, the target planet hosted a population of just over 800 million. That population had been reduced to just under 80 million, a completely reasonable number for the incoming Colurian colonists to manage. But this planet, Earth, hosted a population of over 8 billion. At first he thought the number was a misprint. Surely no planet the size of this one could support so many life forms. The most populous planet in the Colurian hegemony was Cestus III, and it hosted just over 1 billion Colurian citizens, and it was nearly 20% larger than this Earth. As he sat reading the reports, he realized why this mission was so large. When he had been picked to lead this mission, he had been caught off guard by the size of the fleet he had been chosen to lead. 15 capital ships, each more than 10 kilometers in size, hosting nearly 1,000 crew and more than 1 million extermination professionals. Never in his life had he seen such a large annexation expedition. In fact, he didn't even realize that the Colurian hegemony had 15 million extermination professionals. Perhaps many had been quickly trained for just this mission. Even with 15 million extermination professionals working, it could take months to reduce the Earth's population to manageable levels. Reviewing the intelligence on the new world, he formulated a plan of action. The planet, Earth, has several large landmasses separated by water. General Tshirt decided that he would place his fleet in high orbit and then send down 3 scout ships followed by 3 more capital ships to begin the eradication of the humans. Once these ships and their crews had completed their initial operations and secured a foothold, the remaining capital ships would land to continue the process. Intelligence had determined that the humans did have rudimentary spaceflight and aerial capability, but the humans relied on reaction engines for power. Rockets, General Tshirt snickered under his breath. Rockets will be as effective against our technology as throwing pebbles at a charging beast. Soon, General Tshirt moved his fleet into orbit of the blue-green planet known as Earth. There was no doubt that his fleet of 15 10-kilometer ships was clearly visible from the planet's surface. As he prepped for the initial incursion on the planet, he wondered what the humans were thinking. It was common for lesser advanced societies to view the Colurians as gods. Oftentimes, lower species would attempt to pray to and offer sacrifices to the Colurian colonists, believing them to be gods, who had somehow been angered by their actions or inactions. It didn't matter. He had a job to do. This planet would be pacified and its remaining people processed to serve the Colurian hegemony. However, instead of prayers and offerings, General Tshirt was surprised when he was notified that an incredibly powerful EM signal was being transmitted directly to the Colurian fleet. The ship's computer had determined that the signal was the equivalent of a "Hello, welcome to Earth" message. Not really the first contact he had expected, but perhaps fortuitous. Perhaps this mission will go smoothly, he thought to himself. They seem to be more intelligent than we expected. I will inform them of their great blessing of being annexed into the Colurian hegemony. And once I explain to them the necessity of reducing their population to sustainable and manageable levels, I'm sure they will understand. General Tshirt could not have been more wrong. His initial conference had been with the Secretary General of something called the United Nations. This Secretary General had been flanked on both sides by several people of which General Tshirt came to understand were the leaders of the most powerful nation-states on the planet. Instead of the reasonable response General Tshirt expected, he was surprised by their reactions. When he had explained the situation to them, the whole meeting had devolved into a shouting match, with the humans declaring war on General Tshirt and his fleet. No matter how much he tried to reason with the humans, he was rebuffed with vitriol and hatred. He patiently tried to explain how advanced the technology of the Colorians was. He tried his best to make it clear that the humans had absolutely no ability to stand against the Colorian hegemony. One of the humans, Tshirt thought he said he was American, had told him to go do something physically impossible to himself. Finally, out of exasperation, Tshirt had ended the big conference and began to move forward with his orders. Returning to his original plan, General Tshirt dispatched the initial 3 scout ships towards the plant's surface. As expected, they were met with the primitive aerial vehicles of the humans. Also, as expected, the descending scout ships made short work of the attacking human craft. Using their directed energy weapons and gravity manipulation equipment, the scout ships deftly wiped the attacking craft from the sky, as easy as one may smack a bug from the air. By the time the scout ships had completed their part of the mission, more than 100 human craft had been swatted from the air, with no more effort than it would take to move an annoying hair from in front of your eyes. The initial scout ship campaign had proceeded without incident, and General Tshirt gave the order for the 3 capital ships to begin their part of the mission. As before, the capital ships were attacked by human ships, but this time the human ships were ignored, with little more effort than one would expend walking through a cloud of gnats. Hundreds of human ships fell from the sky, as the colossal capital ships descended to the planet's surface. Once there, the ships began disgorging their extermination professionals. On the ground, they were met with what appeared to be human armies. Unbelievably, in the short time since their arrival, the humans had seemed to amass armies numbering in the millions. No matter, thought General Tshirt, as he watched the events unfolding on his view screens. Just saves us the time of hunting them down. As he watched, thousands of human troops vanished in puffs of vapor, as the Colorian incinerated them to gas. The human slug-throwing weapons, on the other hand, were as useless as child's toys against the Colorian armor. Oh, from time to time a human would get lucky, and a Colorian would fall, mortally wounded. But for every Colorian that fell, more than 1,000 humans fell. Well, casualties are to be expected on a mission like this, Tshirt thought to himself, as he watched the fracas unfolding on his screen. Suddenly, the humans seemed to stop fighting. It was as though a single command had been heard by every human at the same moment. In a single motion, the humans stopped fighting, turned and moved quickly away from the Colorian landing site. The retreat of the humans was so sudden, so fast, and so well coordinated that it left many of the Colorian exterminators standing scratching their heads. In a matter of minutes, not a single living human could be seen in any direction. In moments, General Tshirt's view screen went from the cacophony of battle to dead silence, as the Colorian exterminators tried to ascertain where all the humans had gone. Turning to his first lieutenant, Tshirt requested a scan of the area. "General Tshirt," replied his lieutenant, "it appears that there are now virtually no humans anywhere near any of the capital ships." "What?" exclaimed Tshirt. "Where did they go?" "Well," replied the lieutenant, "on reviewing the scans, it appears that the majority of the humans were moving away from the landing sites the whole time. The ones resisting have now begun to board high-speed transports and are quickly leaving the area." "I don't understand," replied General Tshirt. Eyeing his console, the lieutenant continued to speak. "It appears," the lieutenant paused for long moments as he assessed the situation, "that the humans that were resisting the Colorian exterminators were simply a delaying tactic, buying time, so to speak, for the other humans to escape the area." "Escape? To where, and why? Don't they understand that they can't hide from our sensors? They're just delaying the inevitable." "Of course, General," continued the lieutenant. "But our scans confirm that there are very few humans within 25 kilometers of the perimeter of any of our capital landers, and that distance seems to be widening." "Very well. Order the exterminator squad leaders to form back up. We will regroup into standard eradication phalanxes. The general looked down at the timeline on his personal data device. I was hoping that their resistance would actually speed things up. Leaning back and exhaling, he continued, I guess we will just stick to my original timeline estimate. A few moments passed while General Tshirt watched the view screens as his extermination professionals arranged into squads. Various ground and air vehicles were being unloaded from the capital ships. He watched the work with pride, thinking about the coming day when he could walk back into the Chlorian High Council chambers and hand another pacified world, ready for colonization, over to the hegemony. I guess they will give me another medal, he thought. Just then his thoughts were interrupted by his third in command. General Su, I'm seeing something strange in my global scanners. Turning toward the station over his left shoulder. What is it, Lieutenant? Said the general. I just registered several missile launches from a remote area on one of the western continents. Ah, now they are trying to attack us with their primitive chemical rockets. The general smirked as he watched the readout. According to my readings, the missiles appear to be ballistic projectiles. The first one appears to be headed for the Dominator. As you remember, you assigned the Dominator to the eastern region of their western hemisphere for eradication. That missile should reach its destination in about 8 minutes of their time. The other two projectiles seem to be on a polar arc headed for the other two capital ships, on the primary continent of their western hemisphere. They will take a few minutes longer. So I did. General Tshirt rubbed his chin as he looked at the numbers on the screen. Well, at that speed, they might do some minor damage, but I don't think it's anything to worry too much about. Notify Captain Lamata of the Dominator, as well as the other captains, about the incoming projectiles. They might want to hit them with a heat beam to soften them up before impact. I doubt that we will see more than a splattering of hot metal on the hulls of our ships. Yes, sir, replied the lieutenant. General Tshirt turned back to his view screens to watch the preparations. Of course he was watching the Dominator. It was the pride of the Chlorian fleet. A few minutes passed as the troops continued to mobilize. No, not troops, he quickly corrected himself. The Chlorians were so far beyond these humans that referring to the extermination professionals as troops was an insult to the Chlorian military. Suddenly, a beam of light could be seen emanating from a turret on the top of the Dominator. Ah, the general thought to himself. Captain Lamata was hitting the incoming projectile with a heat ray. That should soften the falling object up and turn it to liquid, thought the general. It would be little more than warm rain on the hull of the massive Dominator. Suddenly, there was the ever so brief flash of white light, and all his view screens went dark at the same moment. What happened? Exclaimed the general, as he turned back towards the lieutenants at the station behind him. A few moments of silence followed as every officer on the bridge scanned their readouts in confusion. I don't know, sir, Farley answered his second-in-command. All contact with the Dominator has been lost. Lost? What do you mean, lost? Replied the general. I don't know, sir. One moment everything was completely normal, and the next nothing. The lieutenant continued, operating various controls, in a desperate attempt to understand the readouts he was seeing. Long moments passed, while the bridge around him was a chaos of disorientation and confusion. Give me a minute to acquire an orbital view. Suddenly, the colour drained from the face of his third officer. It's gone. His lips shook, and his fingers trembled as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Gone? Growled the general. What do you mean, gone? The Dominator, sir, added the lieutenant, his voice breaking as he tried to form the words. The Dominator is gone, sir. Gone? Exclaimed the general, as he jumped to his feet and rushed to the lieutenant's side. The display showed an orbital view of the eastern part of the largest continent in the western hemisphere of the planet called Earth, where, just shortly before, could be seen the hulking mass of the 10-kilometer diameter Dominator was nothing but a flaming wasteland as far as the eye could see. Above this hellish landscape, a 30-kilometer mushroom cloud was quickly billowing high into the stratosphere. What happened? What am I seeing? Shrieked the general, his voice raising an octave with each breath. "General," came a voice from the science station. "According to these readings..." The general turned toward the ensign working the science station. "The Dominator was destroyed by a nuclear attack." The general turned back towards the view screens, displaying the other two capital ships on the surface of the planet. "Nuclear weapons!" he exclaimed. "How could a Class 4 society field nuclear weapons? Get word to those captains. Warn them." As the general was speaking, there were two bright flashes of light, and the remaining two capital ships disappeared from view. The general slunk down into his chair. More than 3 million Colurians dead in the blink of an eye. How is this even possible? Nuclear weapons had been outlawed across the galaxy eons ago. No race was even allowed to study them. Nuclear weapon technology was the most carefully protected and secured knowledge in the galaxy. Yet somehow these humans, barely above cavemen, had not only constructed nuclear weapons, but somehow had managed to enhance them, far beyond anyone's wildest imagination. How is it even possible to build even a nuclear weapon powerful enough to destroy not one, but 3 of the largest vessels in the Colurian fleet? Not only that, but why had the heat rays used by each of the now dead captains seemed to have had no effect at all on the approaching devices? "General Tshirt." The voice of his science officer interrupted his thoughts. "Yes? I have analyzed the destruction of the other 2 capital ships. And? The weapons used were not normal nuclear devices. No single nuclear weapon has the destructive potential we just witnessed." "I know that," sneered the despondent general. "So tell me what it was that the humans used." "According to my data, sir, the humans utilized multiple fusion warheads." "Fusion devices?" The general looked incredulous. How in the name of the gods could a primitive race like the humans even conceive of triggering a single fusion release, much less many such detonations at the exact same moment? "I was closely monitoring the projectiles as they descended towards the other 2 eradication ships." "Continue." "As near as I can deduce, the fusion devices that destroyed our ships were triggered by fission devices." "By the gods, you must be mistaken." "No, sir," continued the ensign. "It appears that the humans have designed fusion devices that are triggered by the detonation of a fission device." "But why did the heat rays have no effect on the incoming devices? I could clearly see that Captain Lamata fired on the incoming projectiles with the Dominator's heat ray, as did the other 2 captains." The ensign swallowed the lump in his throat. "I reviewed the playback of the human attack. Although only 3 chemical-powered missiles were launched, each one seemed to carry at least 4, and maybe as many as 8 thermonuclear devices." The ensign turned a view screen so that the general could see what he was describing. "Here, at apogee." The ensign pointed at the top of several curved dotted lines. "Each launch vehicle seemed to expel its payload of devices. Each device seems to have simply descended towards their targets ballistically and completely independently. Since the devices were suborbital devices traveling at hypersonic velocities, it is reasonable to assume that each device carried a significant amount of ablative heat shielding. Considering the speed at which they were traveling, they would have been exposed to the heat rays for only moments." "And with the multiple incoming devices with ablative shielding," the general added, "there would not have been enough time for the heat rays to have any effect." "No, sir." The ensign's analysis was concise and detailed, especially considering how quickly he had compiled the data. The general decided in that moment to recommend him for a commendation as soon as they returned to the Colurian homeworld. "But now what?" thought the general. The fact that these humans possessed fusion devices, with an admittedly primitive but effective delivery system, changed the mission parameters significantly. A ground-based extermination process now seemed completely impractical. "I better contact the Council for further instructions." "General Tshirt." As the general was mulling over his options, his second-in-command's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Yes, Lieutenant?" "I was reviewing the data from earlier." "And?" "A short time ago, our scanners detected several more launches from various locations all over the planet." "Why wasn't I notified?" "In the confusion of the destruction of our 3 ships on the planet's surface, we simply overlooked them." Spinning in place, the general screamed, "Find them! Find them now! I want to know where those rockets are headed!" In moments, the ensign spoke up. "I have them, sir." "Sir?" There was a long pause. "The missiles have already dispersed their payloads." "Where? Where are they headed?" screamed the general. The ensign's face went white as the blood drained from it. He couldn't speak. He simply raised his trembling hand and pointed towards the main viewport at the front of the bridge. General Tshirt turned toward the often ignored window at the front of the ship. His brain did not even have time to register what his eyes were showing him. There, just meters away, was a cloud of cone-shaped objects traveling straight towards his face at hypersonic velocities. Had it not been for the fact that the only thing in normal space that travelled faster than these dozen or so cone-shaped harbingers of death was light itself, his retinas would have never even sensed the photons that fell on them. As it was, before the signals could even travel along the short bundle of nerves from his eyes to his brain, the fuses triggered. Milliseconds later, spherical high-explosive charges leaped to life, compressing the plutonium at their hearts, more than doubling its density in nanoseconds. A split nanosecond later, untold trillions of plutonium atoms began to split, as the free neutrons cascaded through the excitable element. X-rays intense enough to melt a building-sized mass of lead poured forth from the primal forces being unleashed by a tennis ball-sized mass of metal. These rays, more powerful than those released by a star, impacted a secretive material known as fogbank. Quicker than light could traverse the width of a human hair, this material became plasma, hotter than the surface of the sun. Sitting at the core of this conflagration was another small sphere of plutonium, surrounded by caustic material. The raging forces of creation compressed this caustic lithium deuteride inward towards this golf ball-sized sphere of silvery metal. Only nanoseconds had passed since the fuses triggered. As the signals rushed along the nerves from General Tshitrt's eyes towards his brain, his body evaporated in a hellish inferno hotter than the core of a star. His brain never even registered the flash of light from the detonation. All these apocalyptic energies unleashed by the primitive, barely better than cavemen on the planet that spun slowly below. Across the surface of the Earth, millions of people turned their eyes skyward. For long moments, the planet had 12 new suns hanging in the sky. But slowly the primal forces unleashed by humanity waned. The fireball slowly disappeared, leaving only twinkling embers in their place. As the darkness returned, and the stars once again shone forth, mankind breathed a collective sigh of relief. Nightmarish weapons that for decades were feared to be the end of humanity had become its salvation.